Hello.
Hi.
We're back in Los Angeles with all our friends.
We have little stuffed animals, Brody stuffed animals on the couch, and we have like a little squirrel in between us.
Reindeer, we're just hanging.
What's the squirrel's name? They all have names.
They don't have names on the tags.
What?
Their names are on the actual cardboard thing that you take off, which makes no sense.
That makes no sense.
actually
Like
don't
Beanie
know.
Babies have names on them.
The tag. Yeah. So I don't know. Okay. Forever we'll never know what his
You know
name
what?
is.
Emma today, we went to Santa Monica for a little bit and she was trying to find squirrels and our nanny Alex named the squirrel Steve. Okay. So we went to go find Steve so we can call him Steve.
This will be Steve.
Steve the squirrel.
Perhaps at a later date the others will get a name.
Well, actually we know that the cow's name is called Coway.
No.
Conway.
Yeah.
Yeah, Coway is the
your water machine.
Conway is
okay,
the cow.
Really quick. We're going to just take we're just going to take a moment.
Not.
So Erica is a weirdo and we were in the elevator of her condo one time. And she sees this large machine of this guy that's moving out and she says to the neighbor what is that? He's like, "Oh, it's the best water. It's like this Japanese filtration system, blah 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 blah." You pay whatever a month and you get this amazing
He's
filtered
like, it's the best water I've ever had.
The best water I've ever had. And it's so funny because in that exact moment, I knew that Erica was going to have one of these machines. She was waiting for someone to tell her what the best water filtration system was. And
here it was. So I signed off on a 3-year contract without actually seeing the exact thing.
How large the machine is.
It's so large it can't fit underneath my cabinets.
Yeah. So anyways, that's just a fun
little... so this cow's name is not Coway.
It's Conway.
It's Conway. Okay.
Okay, so there's a lot that's been happening in life.
So much.
This is probably the last intro we're going to film in this location for a while.
And it's the last time we will film something in this location prior to who knows what the fuck is about to happen.
Yeah.
Surgery, clinical trial,
moving to Boston. There's so many things happening. So it's been a wild week. And so obviously we hung out and we decided what better thing to do than to give some love to our podcast because we're gonna be away from it for a little minute.
Yeah, although even though we're going to be away for a minute, Jordy has already planned 2 podcast episodes 1 week after surgery. Yeah. Because I'm going to fly out to Boston to visit her. So, right, you're doing the trial.
I'm doing the trial. I'm having surgery. This is going to come out after I've had surgery. No.
This is going to come out. And
it's going to come out
later this week.
Later this week, I'm getting surgery. And this will come out right before that. So... you're a little ahead of where I'll be.
When you're hearing this, if you're hearing it right when it
comes out,
then Jordy will be doing her T-cell collection, which is a 5-hour blood draw.
Yes, where they basically take your T-cells out of your blood and they send them off to a lab and they engineer them to go and attack your tumor.
No big deal.
No big deal. And then a few days later, I have surgery to remove whatever little piece of tumor is in my head. And then we'll recover from that. And so that's the plan.
Yep.
And so my plan is to get the surgery and then Erica's going to come out and visit and then we should have some interviews.
We should have 2 podcast interviews.
Well, we have someone that already signed up and then we have someone that reached out and I was just yeah, what else are we going to be doing? Of course.
I would like to know who else thinks that they would have a podcast interview too 1 week following surgery. I don't think anyone.
Okay, but I did go to the Jonas Brothers concert 1 week after my previous surgery because I was I'm going to the Jonas Brothers concert. It's happening. I think it was a little more than a week, but still, this is less intensive than going to
I guess
concert.
It's more cognitive. It's a lot more cognitive effort. Also,
I should be feeling well. If I'm not,
see if I would
I obviously won't do it.
Was recovering from surgery, I'd be let's just, I don't know, go see the swan boats in the lake.
See, I feel that's going to be more energy for me to walk the city of Boston.
Very fair.
I should walk, but I shouldn't do any strenuous exercise for 4 weeks.
And it's going to be hot.
Yeah. It's really hot there.
Really hot?
It's really hot. it's like worse than here in the valley.
Wow. I guess because it's
because
wet.
it's warm. Yeah, like very wet and
It's
muggy. Yeah. So anyways, that's the latest. But that's why we're here right now, because we wanted to get some great episodes out and ready to go for when I'm recovering. Yeah. And so we actually talked with someone a little while ago who Erica found through Instagram.
This is like my weird stalkerish stuff.
Yeah.
So when we decided, okay, we're doing this podcast, Jordy and I, we were thinking we want grief to be really expansive. We want to look at all of the different topics of grief, not just loss and death. And as a suicide researcher and clinician, I was like, we should get someone who's experienced or who knows firsthand someone who's died by suicide. So I'm pretty sure I typed into Spotify or Instagram, probably Instagram,
yeah.
Like suicide, died by suicide. I don't know what. But
probably died by suicide because that's
the name of the podcast.
That's the name of the podcast.
So then I landed on Tessa Harrington's Instagram called Died by Suicide. And she actually started her own podcast just for herself to explain the story of her husband and all about him and how he died by suicide. And I started to listen to it, and it was just like really emotional and sad. And also I just thought it was really beautiful and caring that she wanted to give back to other people and spread awareness around suicide. And also she said that people around her like had no idea that he was struggling. And so this was her way of letting the people closest to her know what was going on.
Yeah. And what I found interesting about her episode is that she's like actually works in the medical field. And so she's someone that's like been around this before. And so she has some exposure. And also, as you'll learn in the episode, her husband was in the military. And so she's someone who has been trained to like work with people who are in the like throes of having suicidal ideation and like being on the scene helping them. And like there were things that she didn't see that were right in front of her. And I just think that's so telling as to like what depression can do. It like can make you go so introverted that like even the people closest to you, like they know that there's something wrong, but they don't know the extent of how much you're really suffering. And I think that was just like really eye-opening to me to know that like not only did she have personal experience with it, but she also had this professional experience.
Right.
And then I think about someone who has no experience, who's going through something like this or knows somebody who's died by suicide, and how shocking and devastating that must be and feel, and how many questions and what ifs there probably are lingering.
Yeah. I mean, felt like I was kind of like on the edge of my seat the whole time, and she has a young kid, and it just made me think that life is just so precious and people struggle. Like mental health doesn't discriminate against anything.
No. Like she said she knew when they came to the door, she knew what
I know. That's why,
which is just like
I had like chills down my body when she said that she opened the door and she knew, because she used to be on the other side of that door telling people if someone died. And so she instantly knew when she opened the door and there were police officers.
And I thought it was like also just like really telling about her character, like how concerned she was for like his group of people. Right. Because like,
I mean, you can relate to that.
Yeah. It's just like you want to make sure that your people are okay. And it's like they are also at higher risk of this kind of thing happening, of being, exposed to trauma and having depression and maybe some suicidal ideation or attempts. And it's like, just for her to like step outside of her own experience and be like, I just like don't want this to happen to anybody else, especially not because of their grieving of her husband, was just like really, just said a lot about who she is and like how empathic she is and caring she is. And it was just like,
and she was so honest too, which is hard to do. Like she spoke a lot of truths that I think people might think about like a partner who's struggling, but she shared them and just gave me a different perspective as someone who, again, like works with it more clinically in a work setting, to see it firsthand. Yeah.
It is different to see like the inner workings of what it does to your community and your family and your relationship and how you want to move forward in life. And yeah, we were just so grateful that she was willing to talk to us strangers who stalked her on Instagram.
I know, my stalking has paid off. Usually my stalking abilities they aren't for any good, but here it actually
I feel like they're always
something.
for good, but like they don't really benefit anyone outside of like me and you,
right?
Or like our group of friends
and my curiosity.
Yeah, like this was like, oh, this person seems interesting. I feel like she has a story to tell, and like we want to get to know her and hear about it. And so we hope you guys like this episode as much as we did. And you know, it's a heavy one, but I think it's a really important one to listen to. So we'll get into the episode now.
Yep. Welcome to Grief Street. I know that I kind of stalked you online because I was looking, which is so weird to say, but I specifically Jordy and I decided to do this podcast around grief, and we were thinking about so many different layers of grief. And I actually specialize in working with teens and young adults who are suicidal and self-harming. And so I always knew that I wanted to bring on someone who has experienced that or has a loved one who's experienced that. And so I think I was actually searching for the word suicide, and then I found your podcast, and then I listened to your podcast, and it was really beautiful and sad, and like your story was just so sweet. Like I was following along and just felt really invested, and then I stalked you on Instagram and found you and asked if you would come. Yeah, my specialty. I'm a really good stalker, and I'm just so grateful that you agreed, because you don't know who we are, and I thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Well, like I said, thank you guys very much for having me. So it's been quite a journey, but I think it's always good to talk about.
And I love that you started the podcast, which we can introduce more in a little bit, but you started the podcast to tell your own stories, and then also so that other people could learn. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about yourself and your story.
So, it's weird. I've gotten that question a lot, and I don't ever feel like I'm very good at or very prepared to answer it. So my name is Tessa. I am the mother of two wonderful children who are crazy, but they're amazing. And I have spent the last 10 or so years of my life in EMS. So I am a paramedic. That's one of my favorite things I've done during that time. Like I've seen a lot of death, witnessed a lot of grief, all of that stuff. And now I'm actually in nursing school. I'm almost done with getting my BSN.
Wow.
So, but earlier or last year, it feels crazy. Last year, it kind of started out with the death of my father. So my dad died September of 2022. And then about 4 months later, my husband died by suicide, which was like absolutely crazy just kind of to go through, because my dad's, death was I don't think death is ever, a very calm or expected thing, even, in terminal things. It's never, because I've seen people in hospice and still no one's prepared. Even you can give them all the paperwork and all
sure.
And I don't think anybody's ever prepared for that, but it was very sudden. And then, so it's kind of like this big shock. And then you're kind of trying to settle down from the shock, and there's like another gigantic shock. And it's just been, it's been like a really crazy 2 years, but I started the podcast to talk about it, and it's actually helped me heal. And I've been doing a lot of self-healing and a lot of so I'm kind of doing a lot of things. So
yeah, and I love the name of your podcast is Died by Suicide. And you talked about how actually the wording matters so much around how we talk about how someone dies by suicide versus using the term like they committed suicide. And I love how you're in that spreading awareness around using the word committed is like doing an illegal act, and really the importance around the language is important.
Yeah. Well, I feel a lot of, like you said, the language is very important around it, like how people view it. I think my husband and other people that I've seen have struggled with mental illness, like it's a lot of a stigma thing. It's a lot of like they're concerned about the way people might view them, or things that, you know, people might think of them differently because of the different wording of it or the different phrasing. And it's like, okay, if we can be a little bit more comfortable with the phrasing, if we can be a little bit more comfortable with getting help, then maybe these things won't happen so much. And a lot of what I talk about, maybe not so much on the podcast, but I've done speeches and talked with different communities about this, is finding coping mechanisms. And, you know, early on mental health versus waiting to the last minute and then not really coping well with stressors and then ending up in a, you know, suicide or potential or suicide attempt situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's something Erica and we were just talking about that this weekend, where we were saying like early intervention is sometimes people feel like they don't want to come in until things are really, really bad and they're feeling desperate. And it's so much harder to find a way out in that space versus if you start to have those feelings and you are able to reach out and access support earlier on, you're like the outcomes, I feel like, are just so much better because you're in a better place mentally to be able to like use those coping skills and use the tools and really, you know, like get the most out of the resources.
I mean, I even saw like myself doing that where I got my son into counseling right away because I knew that would be very important for him because he was like 4 at the time. He's almost 6 now. And so I felt like that was really important to get him help, make sure he's okay. But for myself, I really didn't. I was doing other things. Like I was finding as much, I'm really into like physical activity. Like that helps me with a lot of my anxiety. So I was running a lot, working out. I do a lot of ice baths. I have a little ice pod thing that I love.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of that to like combat my anxiety. And then I was like, okay, crazy. Like you're doing, like, you can't sit in an ice bath all day. You can't run all day. You can't do all these things all day. Just go talk to somebody. And it took me a little bit to like finally go talk to somebody. And then I did, and I felt so much better, but it's still kind of like, it was still me. And it wasn't that I had an issue with talking to somebody. It's like, I just wanted to do it myself. And then I found that doing it myself was still overwhelming. And that's when I eventually finally talked to somebody.
I'm so glad that you did. And even when you make the choice to see someone, it can be so hard to figure out, well, who do you want to see? And getting a fit of like, who can help you through this type of loss and grief can be challenging.
Because it is so complex.
It is. I was very lucky that because he was full-time in the military, he kind of had this weird position where he was National Guard, but he was full-time, so he was technically active duty. So I was, luckily enough, I was able to get some services through the VA and through the military, and they actually set me up with with my therapist, who's amazing. And she and I also she and I jive very well together.
That's great.
I'm so glad.
She kind of pulls a mama bear on me sometimes, and she'll text me. She's like, I haven't heard from you. What are you doing? Like, I'm like, oh, sorry.
We love a mama bear therapist.
Yes.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about your husband and you and how you met and your relationship?
So we met in paramedic school we started dating around 2015. And I talk about this a lot in my podcast, but he was very much a driven individual. He was very much like he wanted to go to PA school after doing some paramedic stuff. We both had a plan of we're just going to work a lot, save a lot of money, then, you know, have these other plans. And then at some point he had ended up getting a job full-time with the military. And within that, somehow something kind of changed in him. And he always had a little bit of an issue with drinking. You know, sometimes it was concerning. We talk about it. Things would change. It would kind of get better from there. But there was kind of like, there's this flip, I feel, that switched in him. And then he would go down these really bad drinking pathways. And that's how kind of 5 years of our relationship was. We ended up having 2 kids together. And those were kind of during better times when he wasn't drinking as much. But it's kind of like this weird moment, this weird kind of situation where you don't realize sometimes how bad things can be until you're out of them. But also you're kind of holding on for the person that they once were.
Sure.
And I like to mention the person that he once was, because it wasn't like he was ever a terrible person. Like, he wasn't an abusive alcoholic. He just wasn't present. You know, he wasn't kind of there. Obviously, he struggled, and we try to work and find coping mechanisms. And he would, you know, go work out or go do stuff here and there, but it wasn't consistent. And then it would always fall back to him drinking. And then he was in a really bad kind of downward spiral when he died. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. But it was definitely, to me, it was that he wasn't able to cope a lot with the things that were going on in his life, whether it was he was leaving for his 3rd deployment. You know, he was leaving 2 kids behind. He was leaving me behind for this deployment. And at any moment he could find a drink, he would, I think, because it was just a lot of his feelings and his thoughts, and his life was overwhelming to him. And that's kind of where he spiraled, and we were fighting a lot. And then he, then he died by suicide. So, but I think it was a lot of the fact that he didn't have any sort of consistent coping mechanisms to kind of deal with his stress and deal with his issues in life. But the other part of him is that you wouldn't, like, I knew it because I would see it at home, and I would see it, you know, not at work, but none of his friends really recognized it. You know, I like to call it the Robin Williams syndrome, you know, where he's happy, funny guy. Everybody loves him. You know, no one suspected anything. And then all of a sudden he's gone. And it was like so confusing and devastating and shocking to a lot of people. And it's, I think, because a lot of them, they didn't see the struggles that were behind the scenes. Which, I mean, you know, you don't need to tell everybody every time you and your significant other fight, you know, not everybody has their own struggles. But I think that was another reason why I started the podcast, is because it was such a shock to so many people, because they just didn't see him ever doing something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it seems like you're highlighting the fact that his support network maybe wasn't in place for him in terms of having, outside of the relationship with you, having other people in his life that he could confide in an honest and vulnerable way. So then when something like that happens, people are totally taken by surprise because they didn't even know that was going on inside of his mind.
Yeah, I mean, even with me, he would, to get to really, a root cause of a problem, he would be really drinking a lot, and then we get to, I would be able to, talk to him and kind of decipher things, and that's, the only time that he could really be very, open and vulnerable about things and be able to talk about things, which it's a very difficult situation to be in, you know, if you can't talk to anybody about anything.
Right, and when you see a reality that no one else sees, it can be hard, I imagine, and we'll get more to, but in the moment when he dies, of how many questions did you field from people while you're grieving and everyone around you is shocked? Did they come to you asking questions, or what was the response after he died?
It was a lot of support. There was a lot of support around his friends. There wasn't a lot of questions. There was a lot of questions after, and I smile at this because it's I've been in these very weird moments where people have figured out either one way or another that, you know, how John died, and they'll be one guy asked me if it was my fault. And
my gosh.
What? And I was are you, and you know, I've done all these things, I'm and I've gone through like therapy and I'm like really working on myself. And this guy, was it your fault? And I was like, well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I don't think so. And,
wow.
I'm like, it's lucky that you say that to me because like I feel I'm like decently well grounded in everything that's gone on. I was like, but you say that to the wrong person. And it's like, holy
Spiral.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Spiral. But no, but after he died, there was just kind of like a lot of support. There's a couple of our friends knew what was going on because he wasn't, we had gotten in a really bad fight and he left, I kind of kicked him out type thing. I was like, don't come back until you can be sober pretty much. And so he left. And so a couple of our friends knew that we weren't in a good space. Mm-hmm. So, but there wasn't a lot of questions. There was a lot of support. But I also felt very protective of his friends. Like I felt like bad. Like I wanted to make sure that they were okay. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make sure that they were, like, I know that they had to grieve, but I felt really bad for them because
I'm curious why you felt like the need to protect.
Well, I think it's because, like I said, they didn't see all the stuff that I was dealing with. And so like, it was probably more shocking for them. And also, I felt like a lot of them were leaving. They were all deploying still. Like they didn't change that.
Got it.
And so I wanted to make sure that they were okay before they left because in a deployment situation, I've never been deployed, but like, even when I'm at work, like as a paramedic, it's like, you really need to focus on life. Like you can't focus on everything else that's going on. You need to focus on what's in front of you. And I really wanted that to happen for them. Like I wanted them to be able to focus on the things they needed to. But the other part of it, I was also scared that there would be more suicides. And internally, I felt like that would be my fault because I couldn't stop John from his. And then people came back and they couldn't cope with theirs. And then internally, like that was a big like anxiety thing for me for a while, that someone else either in my family or our friend group was going to kill themselves and then it would be my fault.
So it's like when that guy asks you, so was it your fault? He doesn't realize how much you're asking yourself that question, not just about your own husband, but about what future losses there might be as a result of that, or, at the same time as that was going on. That feels so heavy, like so much weight on your shoulders to hold. So I'm wondering, like you said, during that time, you were very physically active and sort of taking care of that part of yourself. I'm wondering what other tools were helpful to you in the more immediate aftermath.
Yeah. So definitely, like I have a really good support system. I live with my mom. She's amazing. She's always been amazing through everything. We've been, very close my entire life. So that's been insanely helpful. My family, my uncle, my cousin, he's the one that helped me. Like that was very encouraging me starting the podcast because he has his own, my younger brother and his wife, his family, part of the military family. Like I had a really big support system and I chose that I wasn't going to. The other big part was my motivation. So I probably got a little manic on things and I was like, okay, because I took a break from work. Like I just kind of decided, okay, this is the first time I'm going to focus on myself in a long time, especially, after having kids. But I just wanted to do a lot of things that made me feel better, that made me feel happy. And so starting the podcast was one of them, taking care of myself. I got a trainer and they were amazing. And that helped a lot. Having like some sort of organization in my life was helpful. Even if it was like as simple as like going to the gym and having a routine, that was like really helpful. Because a lot of things just felt like chaos. And just, I guess, just kind of like taking care of myself, just doing things that made me happy, going on walks. But there was also a lot of things that kept me busy, and me being busy is really good too. So, having to deal with a lot of the, probate stuff, aftermath stuff, all this other things, that was also really helpful. Like I was really excited to go to school when school started, because I was like, okay, here is like a very scheduled thing for me that I
Yeah,
have to
for
go to
sure.
all the time. And then it just, because life was very chaotic, when someone, especially not only when one person dies, but when like two people die that quickly, it's kind of like life is
Yeah.
insane. And so the most things I could do that I could control was very helpful for me. And
Right, I
that's
was
what I
just going
tried
to
to
say
do.
that when things are out of your control, like you focusing on what's within your control can just give you a sense of groundedness. And when you were talking about how you and your mom moved in together, I'm like, it just clicked now that both of you lost
Yeah.
both of you lost your husbands, and then like to move in together sounds like so special that you could
Yeah.
like find each other during this time. So I'm curious, like, how did you guys make that decision to live together?
Well, so we were living with my mom before John died. We had moved in pretty much when my dad died,
Got
Got
it.
just
it.
cause, so she wouldn't be alone. And I was planning on moving in with them anyways because I had gotten into nursing school. My daughter was, I think, 4 months old when my dad died.
Wow.
So she just turned 2. So I needed help with them for nursing school while my husband was deployed. So we had already planned on moving in with them even before my dad died. It just got moved up. And then but it was definitely like a blessing because I wouldn't have like survived a lot of it without her.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can imagine like having that built-in support system like 24/7 makes it
Yeah.
like kind of buffers up against all of that grief.
Well, it's nice because I know the moments where I'm sad, and I know the moments where it's like I'm internalizing it. It's kind of birthdays, holidays, that kind of stuff. And so I
Yeah.
know when she's sad, and she knows when I'm sad. So a
Oh.
lot of times, people don't notice that. We'll give each other little sad hugs, and it's like I know what
Oh.
you're
Yeah.
going through, and that's very, very special.
Yeah, you guys are like in sync and attuned with those like griefy days that other people might not recognize or acknowledge,
Yeah.
which is like not what a situation you want to find yourself in. But if you're going to be in it with someone, it's pretty lovely that you get to hug it out with your mom.
Yeah, it was a very serendipitous, it tragically
Yeah.
serendipitous, but it's like, thank God I have her. But that's also why I highly suggest support groups. I've been to one a couple of times. Unfortunately, the one that I go to, it doesn't really line up with my class schedule right now, so I haven't been in a while. But like even just going once and being able to talk with people, and this was a specific like spouse who died by suicide support group, even just being able to talk to them about it and walking in there and it not being like everybody trying to find silver linings and all this stuff. And it's like, you can be mad, you can be this, you can be that, do it. And they were amazing. And so,
Oh,
even if I always suggest to people, if you don't have a good support system at home, definitely find a good support system or some sort of support group because, that was invaluable talking to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, even with a great support system, like no one can truly understand the type of grief that you're experiencing unless they've been in that position. Like people
Yeah.
just can't imagine it and probably don't really want to put themselves in that position. And you had mentioned earlier about the VA, like that's where you got your own therapist. And I know a lot of times in the VA that they do provide a lot of services for the people, like for the vets. And was
Mhm.
your husband identified, and was he receiving services for his own
No,
like
he
mental
wasn't
health and
receiving.
drinking?
No, he was not. Like I said, he was pretty good at hiding it from his work and from people. He was decently good at hiding it from me. I could kind of figure out, but he would, like when I was cleaning out the basement over the summer and I found liquor bottles downstairs that they were hidden. It
yeah.
was, I could kind of tell that he had been drinking, but I couldn't I couldn't prove it to him. And I couldn't say like, hey, you're like, this is gone, or like, you've been drinking this. And so like, I couldn't really, it was hard for me for us to have a discussion about that, because there was like no physical proof for him for me to be like, hey, this is messed up. This is not okay. But so he was pretty good at hiding it, and he did not want to, like, we tried to get him help. Like, I wanted to get him help a lot, and he refused. He was worried, part of it, that he was going to lose his job, because he was in aviation. So sometimes mental health issues don't go over well in aviation. But at the same time, I also think that having to deal with whatever he was dealing with would have been scary, and he would have had to do it sober, and he would have had to do it, he would have had to do it like chronically. Like, it couldn't be like, okay, you can be sober for this weekend. It's like, I think it would have, like, the life change in him living without that kind of buffer, that sedation of alcohol, was really scary for him for whatever reason.
Totally. And even if you did have evidence to prove, I mean, I know this as a mental health professional, you cannot force someone to want to get help. Yeah. Like, you could drive him to get help, and at the end of the day, like, you can't force him to get words out and to want to get better.
I mean, I've dealt with it a lot too, where people have made suicidal statements, and it's like, okay, we can bring you to the hospital, but like, he not once had made any sort of suicidal statements to me. He, especially like when we were fighting, like the last fight we had he said, Tessa, even he could have called me names. Not he ever called me names, but like, he could have said the worst things in the world to me and been like, I'm suicidal. Be like, cool, we're going,
Right.
But that's the only way you can get somebody to go to the hospital, if they're saying like, hey, I want to kill myself. It's like, okay, let's go. Other than that, there's not too much. I couldn't force him to go. No. And he didn't want to. Yeah.
And working in EMS, that's like, a lot about these things. Like, I'm curious, like, your role in EMS, and then learning about your husband dying, like, how was that for you, knowing that from like a professional point of view?
I was very nervous for the person that found him, because that can be very tragic for people. I personally, like, I've seen plenty of dead bodies. I'm not a huge fan of seeing them. But finding somebody, and I didn't know what kind of state he was in. I didn't know, exactly. I didn't know all the details right away, but I was really nervous that, especially one of his friends found him. And luckily one of his friends did not find him. It was somebody else who had a little bit of medical training, and they were able to kind of mitigate it before any of his friends saw him, which is good, which made me feel a little bit better. But also when I got the death notification, it was kind of helpful, because I knew, like, when I saw the state trooper and the guy from the military through the door, like, I knew it was coming. And so I had a second, I think, to be like, okay, because I think I can't remember a lot of things. Like, there are certain details that I don't remember. But I think I opened up the door and I was like, give me 5 minutes, and I shut the door on them, because I had to put my son up to bed.
Oh my gosh. It's like life still goes on.
Yeah. And they were probably like, what the hell? But I saw them. At first I actually thought it was my husband. Like, I thought it was him. I thought he had, like, for some reason, I get these romantical ideas that, like, he had dressed up in, like, one of his uniforms and was coming to apologize. And that happened. That was like a split second. And then I saw everybody, and I was like, okay, this is a death notification.
Wow.
But I had to put my son to bed. And so I didn't want them to, like, keep knocking to, like, wake everybody up, or my daughter up, because it was just me and the kids home at the time. But for some reason, that was helpful to me, to just get, like, a second to compose myself. Because, like I said, everything was chaos at that point, and I never wanted to be out of control. I never wanted to be, like, it made me feel better, like, being able to handle myself. And so having that moment, like, to just take a deep breath and be like, okay, let me put him to bed. I will come downstairs and handle this. And then that's kind of like what happened. And so I was able to handle it, have my moment of being in shock, upset, like feeling insane, but at least like it wasn't in front of my son, it wasn't in front of my daughter. And so that was kind of like these little blessings that I get from that I've had in these experiences.
Yeah, it's like wild because life goes on. Like you still have, like your role as mom, like didn't end in that moment. And it's like what the body will do in like a fight or flight moment. Like you went into survival and you're like, I'm putting my kids down. And also,
then I can like address this.
Yes.
Right.
I was thinking the same thing, how like and I feel this way too, as someone who's just had, some life-changing news happen. It's like the world still goes on and you still have to show up at work. You have to show up for your family. You have to show up for your children. And it's a lot. It feels like a lot to me sometimes. And I'm wondering what it felt like to you when like you said, like initially there was like a checklist of things you needed to do. And you like kind of threw yourself into like the go, go, go mode. When things sort of slowed down, what was that like for you?
I think the slowing down part was really hard, because at that point, then I had a chance to think. And then during that point, it was like I was trying not to drown in a sea of what ifs. Like, what could I have done better? Why didn't I see this? I'm a healthcare professional. Why couldn't I have stopped this? And what if I had done this? And what's going to happen in the future? And like all of these, it's just like so many thoughts and so many, like my brain just would not shut off. And at that point I was having like lots of anxiety. So it was like I wasn't sleeping. So it's, my brain's not shutting down for like 20 hours a day, it feels like. But I was also like terrified to like lay in bed because I was afraid that I'd never get out of bed. And so it's kind of like one of these things where it's like, okay, I've just got to like keep going and somehow survive it. And I think with, being active, and I made 1,000 plans. I didn't follow one of them. Like even, I even at one point I think it was at his funeral, or we had like a get together for everybody kind of before the funeral. And my friends have lived in my house, and I was like making plans on, okay, what am I going to do? They're like, Tessa, you don't have to deal with this right now. And I was like, but this is how it's going to go. And they're like, will you just relax? And it just made me feel better to have a plan. Like I said, I didn't follow any of them, but it made me feel better to have plans. So a lot in the aftermath when things slowed down, my kids were back in school, all of that stuff, I tried to make actual plans and stick to them. I tried to be as organized as possible, and then I had to combat a lot of like the what ifs in my head, which that was the hardest part. And that's really when I started to go to counseling, because that's where it got overwhelming, I think.
Sure. Like it's scary in that moment to slow down and to let the thoughts in your brain just like to sit with them and not know what to do. That like keeping busy or focusing on what's within your control, it's like that can work to an extent. But then it sounds like when you were quiet in your mind, it was hard to just be with all of those thoughts.
Yeah, it was. They were not very nice thoughts. Everything is, oh, this is your fault. This is, why didn't you see that? Why didn't you do this better? That kind of thing.
And I'm wondering how you sort of combat those thoughts now. Like you said, you've been in counseling and you were asking yourself a lot of what ifs. How do you like respond to those in your mind? Because I imagine some of them still linger.
They do. I try not to do the what if thing. I try to, I do my best not to, go down those rabbit holes or say, what if to this, what if to that, what if to that, because none of it is helpful. None of it is positive. And I really don't think that there is anything that any of us could have done, to the point where he was at. Unfortunately, I think that he made a very, brash decision. It was a very quick decision, but unfortunately it was a very final decision. And nobody, I think, really saw it coming or could have really stopped it at that point. Yeah. So it's kind of like, I can't live in the what if. I've got to move on. The what if still kind of follows me a lot. with different things that I'm doing now, you know, like in the future, what if this happens? What if this happens? You know, like what if my next spouse kills himself? What if, you know, my kids do that? And it's kind of like I've got to take a deep breath and just be like, focus on what is actually going on, focus on, you know, real life, these situations, and kind of do your best not to go down these rabbit holes.
Which I'm sure it's so hard not to, because I think as humans, it's so natural for us to feel like we have control. So then to look back and think you didn't have control over your husband, John's death, it makes us feel like anything can happen to like anyone at any point. And that's a really scary. Yeah, it's a really scary world.
I like how you zoomed out and you like in those moments of kind of going down the what ifs about the past, you can ground yourself in the facts, which is like you're a trained EMS professional and you didn't see this coming, and that you can identify that it was like a rash decision and sort of use those things to remind yourself that the what ifs are not helpful and that they don't change what is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been, you know, I talked with my therapist a lot about that, and my mom a lot about that, and different people a lot about that. And it's been, you know, it's been helpful. So, and, you know, I have my son in therapy. I know that a lot of, for a while actually too, is I felt bad because they didn't have a dad. You know, that was a lot of things would make me feel sad. You know, when my son's playing sports and doing stuff like that, and like my daughter's growing up, and, you know, milestones from like 8 months to 2 years is insane. Yeah. And you watch them and like, it's sad not having that person, because especially with their parent, like they've been there the whole time, or they have little like characteristics of each parent. It's like, oh my God, that's so you. And that part was sad. But then it kind of came to, well, they have me. Yeah. And I'm not that terrible. You know, it's not so much like, okay, they don't have a dad, but they have me.
Right.
And they have my mom, and they have our support group. And so it's not sad, it's just different. And that's kind of like where I've been going.
I was just going to ask you about parenting too, because as you said, like you had really young kids, and it is such, Jordy and I both have a 2-year-old, so we know like those milestones and how crazy it is in the 2-year-old stage. But I'm curious how your parenting has changed over the past 2 years.
I'm probably a little bit more strict than I was when John was alive. You know, I feel like there's a dynamic where like one of us would be like, okay, the more strict parent, either that day or like on some things. Sure. And then you have the parent that's a little bit more lackadaisical. And I feel that I'm more strict, especially since I live with my mom, because you get mom, so you get grandma. So grandma, and I want her to be able to be a grandma. Like she's definitely my co-parent, but I want her to be able to be, we call her Gigi, and I want her to be a Gigi. Like I want her to spoil them and do their little like, okay, here's a cookie, you know, like sneak this, sneak that kind of thing. So I'm definitely a little bit more strict with them than I probably would be, but they also have my mom kind of balancing that, which is good. And it's nice to have her and let her take things over sometimes, because especially right after he died, it's like, okay, I'm going to do everything. You know, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And then my mom's like, let me help. Like it was hard for me to let other people help, because I just wanted to be able to, I think, prove it to myself that I could do it by myself. And she's like, you can do it, but just let me help. And so we've been pretty good with that. Like you can't,
you don't need to do it all on your own.
Yes. So, right. And I imagine that was probably healing for her too, to be of service to you in that time when she was also grieving, to like have that to focus on, and like raising these grandchildren with you probably felt like a big sense of purpose.
Yeah, she's been happy that we've been there, or we've been here, and that we've been able to, you know, kind of go through this kind of crazy journey together, versus me always being sympathetic to her trying to be sympathetic to me. It's kind of, we empathize and we have each other, and, you know, we laugh and we cry and we parent and, you know, do a lot of stuff together. But I still make sure she goes and travels, because She loves traveling. So we're being, I think, good co-parents, but I do my best to make sure we're not like codependent, because I want her to have her life. She wants me to have my life. And so we've balanced it out really well, which I'm happy about. So
yeah, it sounds like you're really intentional with the way you've chosen to move forward with parenting.
Well, yeah, I want to, a really big thing is that I never wanted to be like, oh, poor me in this situation. Like I understand this is a tough situation, but I never wanted to have to make excuses for anything that I did. I wanted to be proud of how I handled things. I wanted to be proud of how my kids saw me handle things. I never wanted to be crazy. Like I said, crazy out of control was not where I wanted to be. I wanted to make sure I was okay, my kids were okay, his friends and family were okay, and show them that I was okay so they could be okay. So it was kind of like an okay train, I guess.
Yeah. Well, even for the person who found him, like I think just speaks so much about you. Like you were thinking about who's the person who found John the moment that he died, and like that was what you were worried about. And I just think it speaks a lot to you, like you were wanting to make sure everyone is okay.
But I think in my parenting too, sorry to go back to your question, is I don't want, them to necessarily be victims in this. Like I would want them to be survivors in this. I want them to, not be like, oh, well, I'm going to do bad things because this bad thing happened to me. It's like, no, bad thing happens to everybody in different degrees. Everybody has, like, you guys know, like right. Crazy stuff happens. You can you get to choose on how you're going to react to that. And at this point, I'm not letting them use it as a hindrance, but this is how are we going to help other people? How are we going to do better than what happened to us, type thing.
That's really, really beautiful. Yeah. I think
I try.
Your podcast found me, and I was really touched by it. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what the response has been like in doing the podcast, even if it's friends, family. Like, are there any other strangers who have found you? I just would love to hear a little bit more about your podcast.
I have gotten such good feedback on it. I was very, like, it's scary. I'm sure you guys know it's scary doing a podcast, and I'm like sitting here crying and, talking about this insanely vulnerable situation I was in, or, things that happened to me. But I felt that it was really important, and I felt that it was important to talk about it. And like I said, to get the message out about what happened in our life, because it wasn't like it started out like that. It was kind of a series of events that just led to this really tragic ending to somebody's life. And I don't want that to happen, but it's like, I can't do that for you. You have to do it for yourself. And a lot of people have reached out to me, especially in the veteran community, which I'm super happy that happened, because I feel like that's really where it needs to be, that they're so happy that I did this, that they are very excited, not probably excited is not the right word, but they're happy that I explained his story. A lot of people have reached out and gotten help or found support groups because of it.
Wow.
I've given like different speeches at, I gave one at a veterans rally. We did like a whole march thing, and they normally don't have spouses, but they let me and a couple of my friends come walk. Wow. They're like, oh yeah, come walk 13 miles. And I was like, okay.
That's a lot of miles.
And I talked to, their veteran group, and I talked at a mental health symposium for Hartford Healthcare. Like, I've done a lot, which is scary. But I'm glad that people want me to talk or want to talk about it, because that's the whole point of like the podcast, is not just to talk about my experience, but making sure that other people understand that they can not be doing great and go get help, and it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. I love that you've helped so many through like your pain and your loss, that you've made such an impact on so many people and organizations, like having the VA partner with you and have you speak that's just like making so much meaning out of something so tragic and traumatic.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm glad that people are okay with me talking. I usually stand up and cry, but I try to do my best to like get a message out about really helping people find good coping mechanisms. Some people don't like talking to therapists, and actually, one of my friends, she's working to be an art therapist. That tends to work. She says that tends to work much better with men and veterans, because just the way their brain processes stuff, it's much better for them to express themselves in different ways. And so I think therapy is really helpful, but like just finding coping mechanisms that help for you personally, whatever it is. And then if they're getting overwhelming, okay, you have to find professional help. And that's what I try to like emphasize in every time I talk to people about it.
I like that. It's not like a one size fits all. You have to find what works best for you and feels good for you. And that may be different than your friend or your family member. So one of the questions that we ask here at the end of our interviews is, if you could yourself now, Tessa now in this moment, what would you want Tessa in those early dark moments after initially finding out that John had died by suicide? What would you want her to know from the future you?
Well, knowing me, I don't think I would say too much. I'd say, you got to do the work. It'll be okay, but you got to do the work. I wouldn't, I think that there's a lot of lessons that I had to learn and a lot of growing that I had to do to get there, because I didn't know what was going to be okay and what wasn't going to be okay. And so, not that I, want to be like, it's okay, everything's great, because, my life right now is pretty great with a lot of things, it's a whole other dynamic that you have to deal with after loss, is like finding that it's okay to feel happy even though you've had these things happen. But I would definitely just tell myself to do the work. It'll be okay. And kind of go from there.
Thank you.
I love that. I actually have one more question, because I'm really curious. Like, what was the most surprising thing about your grieving journey, like that surprised you?
I think that I think there was a little bit of relief in after his death, which is kind of sounds weird, and it's a weird thing to convey, but I've noticed it with a lot of people that have spouses that struggle with mental health, and that you're very much a caregiver a lot of times. And this is something that I wrestled with for a while because I felt really bad about it. But I think it's also important to talk about, because other people might feel the same way. It's like, and it wasn't right after he died, but like at some point I was like a little bit relieved that, okay, it's not, I'm sad that he's dead. I'm sad that he's gone and the way that he left, but I'm relieved that there are behaviors that I don't have to deal with anymore, that I don't have to like be anxious about, that I don't have to worry about. And that was kind of surprising. Like I always thought, I would be wrapped up in his sweatshirt and crying and, in bed for days on end, but it really wasn't that. There was a lot of anger, and there was a lot of, and then there was some relief. And it's like, I think dealing with a lot of these dynamic feelings on, moving forward on, I can be happy, and understanding that I'm happy even though this bad thing happened, or because, I'm dating somebody right now and he's absolutely amazing. And so that's kind of like one of those things where it's like, I would never have dated him if he didn't die. But, it's kind of figuring out a lot of complicated feelings, and understanding that feelings, you can have multiple feelings living in one space altogether.
Yeah.
Oh, I can echo that so much too, because for me, like my first pregnancy, and I ended my pregnancy for medical reasons, and there was like 4 weeks of finding out her diagnosis. Do I make this decision or not? And there was relief after I did make the decision. And my living child now couldn't have been alive without the death of my first. And so I can just really relate to those feelings around how complicated and complex it is to be grateful and sad and relieved and angry, like all at once. And I feel like that just really reflects the human experience.
Yeah. And I appreciate you being so willing to share that.
Well, I think it's important. Like I said, it's not always the easiest to convey. And, you know, I don't want people thinking, be like, oh, thank God he's gone. But it's kind of like there's these very dynamic feelings that can live all in the same space. But I was actually listening. I wanted to mention to this to you. I was listening to your podcast earlier, and you had mentioned something about the lights. And I don't know if you had listened to my episode about that, or because there's like weird stuff that had happened. But part of it was when I came home the night that he died, the kitchen lights were flickering like crazy, and they had never done that before. And I had fixed them, and then occasionally they'll flicker, and I'll be like, "What do you need?" Yeah, isn't that so? As soon as you said that, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy." But yeah,
that is so crazy, because I also just filmed something and was talking about Shayla a lot, and the lights were going off, and I was in a completely different house, in a different city. So I have chills that we both have our connection to lights.
Yeah. So I was like, I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But yeah, so I think that, you know, wherever he is gone, you know, or if my dad's gone, where, you know, they're still around, they're still watching over us. And I think he's at peace, and that part makes me happy. And that's kind of like where I do my best to leave it a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. I know that you're going to like touch so many who listen to this, and it's so vulnerable to share. And thank you for going to the hard places and the hard shit so that other people can benefit from hearing your story
and sharing the full spectrum.
Thank you guys too, because you're doing the same thing.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing like the full spectrum of emotions, you know, that it's not always sad, but can also you can feel joy and relief and all those things at the same time.
Thank you.
So I hope you all enjoyed the episode with Tessa and learned some new things. I mean, I think the one thing about why she named the podcast Died by Suicide is one that's really important in terms of the language.
Yeah.
And people have strayed away from using the term committed suicide because it implies illegal intent.
Yeah.
And I think if we can just focus on the mental health impact that someone died of suicide, it really brings it more to it was a mental health condition versus someone was committing an illegal action.
Yeah. She was very intentional about the language that she used, and I think we talked about this a little bit in our intro, but I really appreciated just like her honesty and vulnerability and reflecting on the relationship, and that like I think sometimes when anyone we love dies, sometimes there's like this idea of like rose-colored glasses being put on, and we like look back at all of the experience in like this maybe positive light, even if there were things that weren't. And I liked that she was just very honest and sort of like stripped down about like there were parts of this that were extremely challenging and hard, and there was some relief in knowing that I wasn't going to have to live in that like unpredictability and that volatility anymore. And I just think that that's probably a very hard thing to say out loud. And so I just wanted to commend her for saying that.
I know the honesty that she spoke and doesn't owe it to anyone. And yet I'm so grateful for it because we can all learn from it.
And I just imagine someone listening to this and being like, maybe having shame or feeling guilty about having thoughts like that. You know, even if it's not your partner and it's not somebody who died by suicide, perhaps you're a caregiver for someone, and it's like those things are taxing.
Right.
And so to recognize that like you can be sad and mourn and also feel relief at the same time. It's like really hard to hold those things and can feel icky. But
I think relief is the one that people come back to. Of it can be very hard to say it out loud, and and again, it's all natural. Like all of those human responses are just really normal. So I think like relief is one that has even like more guilt or shame.
Did you, and like I think I know the answer to this, but I'm wondering if you have a sense of that, like if you had a sense of that when you made your decision.
Yeah. So
with your termination.
With Shayla, there was so much trauma when I would like be feeling her kicks, and I felt so much uncertainty about what was happening. And so when she died, the relief was there are no more decisions to be made.
Yeah.
And I'm not in this like uncertainty land, but it was really around the most traumatic part for me is over in terms of I'm not feeling her kick inside of my body when I'm grappling with this decision.
Yeah.
So that was the relief part, but I think that's definitely, it's like jumbled in there.
Yeah. But I think like it just exists in grief. And it's, I think, one that people maybe would want to push down or minimize because it feels, I don't know, uncomfortable or like you're not appreciating the person or you're not, I don't know, sad enough. Like I feel like there's all these like things that you should be as like someone who's mourning.
It's hard enough to lose someone and to be grieving.
Yeah.
Hard enough. We don't need
like
more.
We don't need rules and regulations around like what we can and can't feel and what it should and shouldn't look like. And so I just really loved that she was very open about that because I think it gives permission for other people who are maybe listening or dealing with something in their life to say like, yeah, there are parts of this that maybe feel a little bit easier now. And there are parts of this that are horrendous.
Really, really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And that it's very rare, I think, for something to be all one note.
Yep. Well, if you want to learn more about her, you can find her at Died by Suicide on Instagram and Spotify.
Yeah.
And you can even learn more about her own emotional experiences and story because we went into the story, but she goes through like 10 episodes.
Yep.
And if anyone's interested, you can find her on those platforms.
And I feel like it can be hard to find resources about suicide, like on social media or like podcasts or things like that. I feel like it's one of those topics that people are really like nervous to talk about and like tiptoe around. So I feel like just knowing that that's a resource that you can either, you know, use yourself or share with someone could be really helpful.
I agree.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Yeah, I yawned.
Oh, I was like, you look like you're gonna cry.
I know. My eyes were watery.
You stressed me out for a second. I was like, what's about to happen?
No. I'm actually okay right now. Well, Tessa, we really appreciate her coming on, and we hope all of you enjoyed this podcast episode. And if you want to share more about what was hard to hear, what you like to hear, what you want to hear more of, feel free to reach out. And for now, Erica, I will be responding as Jordy is about to undergo brain surgery.
Wish me luck, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening to Grief Street. We put out new episodes every Monday. If you'd like to support us, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel to find the video version of our episodes. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us a 5-star review. We would love to hear from you and get some feedback. If you'd like to contact us, please email griefstreetpodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 508-474-3378. That's 508-GRIEFST. Our theme song is Hepcat Jive, courtesy of purpleplanet.com. We'll see you next time.